So now we're going to the studio, and you can see I've got a little jar here, and it's full of what we call bead release, which is really just a mixture of flint and kaolin. Sometimes it'll have a little bit of graphite in it. There's different formulas. I buy mine pre-made. There's recipes to make it yourself as well. There's a few different brands out there, and I'll post the ones that I like underneath. But I'm dipping the mandrel, and what the mandrel is a stick that I can wind the glass onto. In this case, it's stainless steel, and I want to dip it into the clay and allow the clay to dry. And the clay will bake on there and kind of act as a little bit of a shell or a buffer in between the glass and the metal. You can see the difference in the color between a dry one and a wet one. They dry pretty quickly. If I dip them at the beginning of the day, they're generally dry after an hour or two. It's pretty humid here too, so I imagine in the desert it might dry a little bit quicker. So now I've got my stainless steel mandrel, and these are called mandrel wound beads for the reason that I get the glass hot and wind it onto the mandrel. You want to heat that glass up slowly. I've got a little piece of black glass, and you can see I was waving it in the flame to begin with so that I didn't get it hot too quickly. If you heat it up too quickly, it'll crack or pop. That's one of the reasons that I'm wearing glasses, to protect my eyes from the popping glass. It's also very bright, so it helps me to see what I'm doing better by having the sunglasses on. These cameras have a light shade on them, so hopefully that will help you see it a little bit better as well. So once you have a little ball hot, you want to preheat your mandrel, and that's what I'm doing with the mandrel in the back of the flame, is I'm just getting it warm so that the glass will stick. And the hot glass will stick to the mandrel. You want to touch the tip of your ball of glass that you've gathered up very gently to a spot on the mandrel in the middle of the clay area, and you touch and turn while it's hot. And if you want to add more, you get a little bit more hot like I'm doing here, and I'll touch and turn. And I'm kind of dabbing the glass a little bit. What I'm doing is trying not to just smush it all in one place, but kind of portion it evenly around the bead. And there's a number of ways to gather up your glass. You can add a lot at one time, or you can add a little bit at a time and slowly gather it up. Here I'm just showing you the process of gathering up the glass. Generally, I'll gather up as much glass as I want, and then I'll round it out. But if you're trying to go for an exact size, you may want to add a little bit, round it out, add a little bit more, round it out again. And it's a little bit slower, but you can get it to exactly the size you want. I'm adding glass right to the center of my bead there. It'll make it wider. If you want to make a longer bead, you need to add glass on either side of where you started. Establish the length of your bead first, and then you can build it out wider. Building it up just a little bit bigger. And trying to add it on there nice and even. So this is the first place we start when learning how to work with glass. This is an Italian glass known as a soft glass. It is Moretti, which is the brand. It is made in the factories. I think it's actually called Effetri now. The company's been making glass for over 350 years and has changed hands, but has stayed basically in the same family. It's still made in the furnaces in Italy, the same way they've been making it for hundreds of years. It's a good quality glass, and they have a great color palette, a very wide color palette. It also melts at a nice low temperature, so I don't need a big torch or a lot of heat to make beads or to melt this glass. I use a lot of Pyrex or borosilicate in my work, and it just behaves a little bit differently. You get it hot enough and it'll move similarly to how the Moretti moves. It doesn't get quite as liquidy, but they both have their properties, and we'll discuss the difference between glasses in the future. For now, all you really need to know is that this is Moretti glass. Even more specifically, it is 104 COE glass, and that refers to the coefficient of expansion of the glass. When anything gets hot, it expands, and when anything gets cold, it contracts. The same thing happens with glass. When it gets hot, it expands a little bit. And different types of glasses expand and contract at different rates. So that COE, or coefficient of expansion, refers to the rate at which it expands and contracts. And when you're using different types of glasses, there are many different brands. The thing that you want to keep in mind is that they are a similar COE, or coefficient of expansion. And they will have that noted on there either when you order it or on the labels on the glass, or just certain brands are known to make one type of coefficient of expansion glass. There are other brands other than Moretti. Moretti is what I'm using here. There's some great companies making some really interesting colors these days in the US. And if anybody has any questions about different types of glasses, you can ask me, or I can provide you with the resources. There are so many colors out there. You just have to experiment with them on your own. This black glass I thought would show up well in the video. It glows for a very long time. Some of the other glasses can be deceiving. You see I'm getting my next color hot because I want to add dots to my bead. You can see it cracked a little bit, and that was just from heating it up too quickly. Some colors do it worse than others. And now I'm going to do some dots. So I position my bead underneath the flame, and I get about as much of that white glass hot as I want for the size of my dot. You don't want to get too much hot. It will very quickly, you'll have more than you need hot on the tip of that rod. And so sometimes you need to let it cool down. But the size of your dot is really determined by how hard you touch down. And so if you touch down very gently, you'll get a tiny dot, and if you smush it down really hard, you'll get a big wide dot. And the hardest part is controlling that, having the same touch, same amount of glass each time. And that just takes practice. But on one bead like this, you can do dots all over the bead, and you would get a lot of great practice in. I like telling students to melt all those dots in and then put dots all over it again, and then melt those in and do it again. And with one bead, you'll find you have control over making dots uniformly. I also tell students that if you can't make them all exactly the same size, then make them all different sizes, do a random dot pattern, and say, I meant to do it. So now I'm doing another row of dots, and I'm going to melt it in. This bead I'm going to be giving away to one of my Patreons. And another row of dots on the other side. If you're going to get set up to do this at home, please get in touch with me if you haven't taken a class or don't have someone to kind of help you along with that. You do want to have good ventilation. I have a hood vent over my head, sucking the bad air out and bringing fresh air in. We discussed I'm wearing glasses, and the other little safety hazard is cuts and burns. So you want a first aid kit, maybe a sink, fire extinguisher, things like that nearby. It's great if you've never done it to be able to take a class to learn these basics in person and really how to set up your studio and that kind of stuff. But as you get more advanced, hopefully you'll already have that. Let me know if I can be of any help on this, though. I'm easy to contact. Just reach out. So I'm trying to melt my dots in just a little bit. If I don't melt them in at all, there's a chance they might pop off. But I also want to leave them raised, so I don't want to give them too much heat. So I'm flashing the bead every once in a while, just keeping it hot, not letting it get so cold that it's going to crack. If we let the glass get too cold, it can crack on us, but also not getting it so hot that everything melts in or that my nice round bead that I had deforms. And then I finish it by putting it in a crock pot with vermiculite. Here I'm removing the beads later once they're cold. These beads were actually inside a kiln. The crock pot is a great way to start with smaller beads if you don't have a kiln and you're just kind of getting your studio set up. But eventually you want to get a kiln. And that allows the glass to cool down at an even temperature so that it contracts at an even temperature as it cools. A pair of pliers is a great tool for removing the beads off the bead release, but sometimes they get a little stuck, and a vise is another nice tool to have. I have a trash can right underneath the vise, so all of that little dust, which is a nuisance dust. It's not good for you. You want to be careful when you're cleaning it up and wipe it down with a damp rag. But it all falls right into my little bucket, trash bucket that I have under there. So I really hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good day.